Why do we dive in Scotland? Because Scotland's got very varied. It's got nice scenery.
Scuba diving in Scotland has progressed over the past century. Commercial scuba diving in Scotland came about in 1953 and was later named Scotsack. Almost a century later, after Mr. William Edward Newton, who was a British officer of patents in 1838, who invented the surface demand valve, and Dr. Manuel Theodore invented the twin hose demand regulator. But Mr. Newton had the chance to test out his surface demand valve during the demonstration. The demonstration was limited to 30 minutes because of the dive, as it was in cold water, without a dry suit or diving suit, as it wasn't invented. The equipment and technology progressed, and self-contained regulators came about in the 1860s by a French mining engineer, Bennett Requerel, who helped design the self-contained and built the first contained breathing apparatus, which had a backpack cylinder that was supplied air through the first demand regulator. Then it was commercialised in 1865. The idea for the scuba diving gear was originally designed for miners to avoid being drowned in flooded mines.
Now, can you tell us what kind of equipment do you need to dive, and is it an expensive hobby? Are you going to kind of show us some things about it and that?
Yep.
Some things about your equipment.
I can show you, yeah. First of all, it can be quite expensive. Anyone that tells you diving's cheap's, you're not telling the truth. It's one of these things that takes a bit of money to get into. The main things being suits and your main aqualung equipment. Your basic aqualung's made up of your tank, which is full of compressed air. You also have a jacket attached to that, which is mounted on your back, and that also acts as a buoyancy device. We call that a BCD, buoyancy control device. On the top of your tank, you'll have a set of regulators attached. These regulators change the pressure in the tank to ambient air that we can breathe. Attached to the regulators, we have two sets of breathing apparatus, a gauge, certain inflation hoses for the BCD, and if you are in cold water, for your dry suit.
Is there a difference in the gear you use here than abroad?
The basic gear, as in the aqualung, is the same.
It's the same.
But for thermal differences, so if you're diving in hot water, we would use a semi-dry suit or a wetsuit, which uses the water to maintain a thermal temperature. But in Scottish waters and cold waters around the world, we use what we call a dry suit, which keeps you 100% dry, and a thermal jacket or full body cover to keep that thermal temperature.
Who governs Scottish scuba diving, and can you tell us something about it?
Scuba diving in Scotland is governed by the Scottish Sub-Aqua Club. Scottish Sub-Aqua Club was formed in 1953 by a group of sort of like-minded scuba divers who sort of started out in the Govan area. Since 1953 there are over 70 scuba diving clubs in Scotland and over 1,400 dive members within Scotsack.
So has it grown as the years go on?
Yeah, it definitely has grown, yeah, and it's still growing in that. Yeah, we had a club at 3 members at one time and we're up to 20 members and that now, so I would think if you average sort of 70 clubs with 1,400 members, you're probably talking 20 members roughly per club.
What about female membership? Is that getting stronger?
Yeah, some clubs, depending on where they are and how many female members, tend to attract more female members. One of our early members was a female, but since then we've not really had too many. But at this moment in time, we've got about 3 female members out of 20 members in the club. So it's still a fairly male-orientated sport.
Andrew, is there a certain age that you have to be before you can dive?
Yes, different agencies set different ages for starting diving. For Scotsack, you need to be 14 to dive as a minimum, although there is a challenge for 14-year-olds diving in Scotland because the gear that we have to use up here is quite heavy, and only a very small number of people would start diving in Scotland at that age. It's a bit easier diving in warmer waters if you're young.
Is there any kind of disabilities that they have to overcome before they even go into the water?
There are some medical reasons why you're not able to dive for fear that the symptoms of the condition could come on underwater. Those would include epilepsy or perhaps diabetes if you had problems with low blood sugars. But being underwater makes you weightless, and that overcomes a lot of physical disabilities. If you have pain in your joints and muscles, being in the water and being weightless can actually make that feel better.
There's plenty of wrecks running about Scottish waters. I mean, East Coast, West Coast. If you want to go up to Scapa Flow and dive in Orkney, the German High Seas fleet for the First World War was scuttled in Scapa Flow, and the club have been up there a couple of times over the last few years and dived the German High Seas fleet.
A lot of our diving is done in sea locks in the west of Scotland. They're a particularly good place to dive because they're protected from the worst of the weather, so we don't get the high waves and strong currents that you would in offshore diving in the rest of the UK. So we can dive pretty much all year round. People are often surprised when we tell them that there's almost as much to see under the waters around Scotland as there is in some of the more exotic destinations that people typically associate with diving. Scotland has things that people would perhaps only expect in warmer countries. So we have corals, we have many sea anemones, we have fish life, and they're all there to be seen. But we also have some amazing megafauna in Scotland. I've dived with seals, and I've dived with basking sharks, the second largest fish in the world. And those encounters have been on a par with anything that you could see or expect to experience in other parts of the world.
The most common causes of death in scuba diving across the world is decompression sickness, recognised as a problem for many divers. It was first documented in 1841. Hypothermia is also a most common reason for death in scuba diving, especially in Scotland because of the cold temperature. Dry suits must be worn when diving in Scotland.
Scuba diving is a dangerous sport. Don't let anybody kid you on. It's a bit like people going mountaineering. There's got to be a bit of excitement in that there. If there wasn't excitement, then people wouldn't do it. It's all down to training. We take our time, we go at the trainees' pace, we do our training in the pool, take them as far in the pool as we can take them before we then take them to open water, shallow open water, run them through that before we move on to deeper water and different other sort of qualifications. But to put it into perspective, there's probably more chance of you being injured driving to the dive site than there is actually scuba diving.
But it is fair to note that that is a dangerous sport. There's no point getting into it thinking that there's no chance of danger. There's always chance. We try to limit it in the training that you get, but you need to make people aware that it is dangerous. But the enjoyment you get out of the sport outweighs the danger 100 times over.
We've never had any life-threatening situations on club dives. However, the club was on holiday in Malta last year, and when we were there on a wreck down at about 25 metres under the water, we came across a Polish man who had virtually run out of the air in his tank. This should only ever happen because people haven't been paying close attention to their own equipment, and we had to rescue him back to the surface, otherwise he surely would have drowned at
In what way did you do that? Did you have puffs each or?
No, so all of our equipment has a spare regulator. The one that we breathe from, there's a spare regulator for the use of your partner under the water if they run out of air or have an equipment problem. So we can give them one regulator and we breathe from the other. It does mean that as you're both breathing from the same tank, you will get through your air a lot quicker. So generally speaking, if you have to do that, the plan is to immediately start heading back towards the surface in safety.